Welcome, everybody. It is the top of the hour. This is Carl Polachuk, founder of the National Society of IT Service Providers, and I'm joined today by Mr. John Armato, who is a freelance genius. Actually, I'm honored to have met him. Now we think maybe 15 years ago, and John is a member of my local mastermind group, but more importantly, he is a partner at Fleshman Hilliard, which is a global PR agency, and
Yep.
he is paid, and his company is paid ridiculous amounts of money for helping people develop strategic plans and figuring out where their company is going. So we are very honored to have him here today. Go ahead and put up the next slide. We always thank our members, and in particular our vendor partners who help support us financially. If you see these vendors out in the wild, please thank them for their support. And also, if you have vendors who should be supporting us, please have them get in touch with admin@nsitsp.org. And we would love to talk to them about joining us and helping to support us as well. And with that, Mr. Armato, I will let you introduce yourself and take it from here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carl. It's good to be with everybody. I am John Armato, as Carl said, and I'm going to leave my video on for just a moment while I talk to you and we get to know each other a little bit. And when I slip into the presentation, I'll go off camera so we can all just focus on the sound of my voice and the slides going by. It's really a pleasure to be with everybody. I enjoy talking about this topic. It's one of my two favorite topics to talk about. And I've been doing this session, Anatomy of a Plan, for at least 20 years. And I'll explain momentarily how it originated and why I started getting into it. But as Carl mentioned, I work with Fleshman Hilliard. We're a global communications consulting firm. I started off in Kansas City, Missouri. I spent about 4 years in New York City, and I've been in Sacramento now for about 15 years. And one of the areas that I consult in has to do with narrative development and messaging and how people are delivering their messages, whether it's corporations or associations or nonprofits. And I do a lot of professional development around the development of plans themselves, and the actions people are going to take, as well as the messages that they're going to share. And one of the things I'm not is a subject matter expert in your area. And I was just pre-show here starting a little rant, which is a tradition of mine and Carl's, about my latest technology woes. So where were the 17 of you yesterday as I was trying to migrate from Windows 10 to Windows 11? I don't know, but 5.5 hours later, just about got the job done. But along the way, in talking about this, I may try and invent some examples relative to your profession, but give me a break if I get it wrong. It's the spirit of the idea that I'm hoping to convey. Because the principles themselves that I'm talking about, I believe are universal. A big fan of knowledge transfer. And this was designed to be what I call a descriptive presentation, not a prescriptive presentation. So it's not to say, here's the checklist, here's the format, here's the exact components that you must follow in this sequence. All plans must look like this. In my younger days, I was probably a little bit more militant and wanting everybody to conform to my point of view, but it just doesn't work that way. And what I find more useful in terms of people absorbing new ideas and putting them to work are the principles, the universality of the ideas. And so this is an attempt to be descriptive and describing what these essential ideas are, and you can mold them and morph them to your purposes as needed. I'm going to occasionally sort of move between the idea of planning for clients, which is the majority of what I do, or the majority of what I do in planning is on behalf of other people. But there's also moments where I'm going to sort of talk about planning for self, because I know within your profession, there's a lot of entrepreneurs, whether it's solo practitioners or small SMBs, those sorts of things. And so there's the need to actually think about strategic planning for your business, and certainly for NSITSP, which I think is a fabulous thing, and I've sort of followed its birth and growth with interest through my friendship with Carl. The principles of strategic planning are certainly relevant to an association, especially one that is nascent and emerging. So I'm going to weave in between my world in communications and the kind of clients I work with, try and make some connections to your world, and move a little bit between planning for clients and self and our own organizations. I can be reached at this email address, and I'm really open to hearing from people. In fact, I sort of crave it, and I'll tell you why. It's not a solicitation of affirmation, but as Carl knows, I'm working on a book version of Anatomy of a Plan with a lot of new content and extended development of the ideas that we're about to go through. And every time I do this presentation, when we get into Q&A or I hear from people after the fact, I learn more things from other people, and that informs the next version of this presentation and certainly informs the development of the book. I'd love to hear from you, if you're so moved at the conclusion of this, anything that really resonates with you, or gaps that you see, or questions that you have that can help me make this better. This has been on a continuous trajectory for about 20 years. And is never quite the same 2 times in a row because I keep developing these ideas, and it's due in large part to folks like you. I am on Twitter, although you really wouldn't know it. But I mentioned this because when I've done presentations at large conferences, that sort of thing in particular, people will live tweet, and I don't know if you're inclined to, and you certainly, I'm not asking you to, but if you do that sort of thing, I do like to go check, and if you will tag it with hashtag AOAP for Anatomy of a Plan, it helps me sort of figure out and see what moments people found particularly useful. But I certainly don't expect you to do that on my behalf. It's just, if that's what you do, I'll look for that. One little housekeeping thing, as you guys know from all of your experience, I'm sure in not only attending but delivering these kinds of presentations. It's a little hard to watch chat and be focused on your content at the same time. I'm probably not going to do a good job of keeping my finger on the pulse of what's in the Q&A section or the chat section. So, but I do like this to be interactive. If there's something that is imperative for me to clarify to you while I'm in progress, flag me down, shout it out, make sure I hear you, and I'll address it. But certainly there's time at the end to do sort of a robust Q&A. Okay, that's all housekeeping. Let's talk about why we're here. And I use this analogy of a stick figure and a medical illustration to talk about where I think we are in general as business people, and certainly in my world in communications consulting, and where I think we ought to aspire to be. For me, in my experience coming up in the PR world, writing plans, having a command of an understanding of goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics is a lot like the way people draw stick figures, the way I draw a person. You have this vague notion that the head goes at the top and the feet are at the bottom, and they're sort of connected. That's very different than what you might expect from somebody who's studied anatomy. They know exactly how the pieces and parts go together, what the interrelationships are, and how one affects another, and that sort of thing. My early days, I've been with the agency for 27 years, and I've been in my career for 37. So I've been a freelancer, and I've worked at a small college. I've worked at an ad agency. I've worked now at the PR firm. In almost all those settings, when you're working with another person or a group on a plan, this inevitably happens, and I suspect you've had this experience as well. Well, wait a second. Is that actually an objective, or is that a strategy? No, guys, I think that's a tactic. Well, wait a second. What are we trying to accomplish in the first place? And you get these round robin conversations. And it's not limited to people who are new in their careers. Even very senior folks in the agency world will get into these disagreements about, is that this or is that that? And the focus of this session really is primarily about goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics, because it's those 4 things that I have found to be the root of the majority of unnecessary confusion as people go about planning. So my goal 25-ish years ago was to learn enough to move from the stick figure to the anatomical drawing. And my goal with the session is to help other people do the same thing. So I think a place to begin then is with a definition. I tend to parse things into their pieces. And this is a working definition of strategic plans that has served me well for many years. You may have other thoughts on it, but for our purposes, a strategic plan is a set of informed recommendations that can be expected to result in a particular set of measurable, intentional, and desirable outcomes. And hopefully you recognize each one of those words has been chosen fairly, rather carefully. Informed recommendations, it's not just a whim, it's not just an opinion, it's stemming from some sort of collection and analysis of information, expected to result in a particular set of measurable. If you can't measure it, you really don't know if you've succeeded or not. Intentional, we're not just taking credit for happy accidents. Desirable outcomes, obviously you're working towards an aspiration. So these ideas are critical to even understanding what a strategic plan is in the first place, in my opinion. Now you may be noticing, at least I hope you notice, this is not sort of the language you might expect from an MBA class or academic literature. My goal has been to make these ideas as accessible as possible and as direct and simple in my own communication. With that in mind, I think breaking it down even further beyond the words of a definition into an exercise in logic is really important, because that's what strategic planning, in my opinion, ultimately is. And I give a nod to Carl with this idea. I know he speaks eloquently and at length on the idea of nothing happens by itself. And when I first heard him start talking about that, it was years after I'd started doing this, and we sort of realized we were both founding our thoughts in a similar premise. And that really is a driver of strategic planning. No aspiration can be achieved without taking action, because nothing happens by itself, right? But no action can be taken without making choices. You know, there's a wide variety of actions typically available to us. So which do we take and why and under what circumstances? And all of these things are really the building blocks of the logic of a strategic plan. I like to tell people, I think of this of strategic planning as thinking on paper. These days, perhaps a computer, but metaphorically the same thing. Strategic plan writing is a structured way of thinking on paper about how to solve a particular problem or seize a particular opportunity. And this idea of committing it to paper or writing it down in some way is critical. It's for a whole other discussion someday about the interrelationship sort of with the neural pathway reinforcement of writing and the clarification of ideas when we move from conceiving them to recording them and then vetting them and going back and forth in that loop. But I think that's an incredibly important part of the strategic planning process, is getting it out in front of you, digesting it, and refining it. It reminds me of the analogy I always think of. One of my sisters is a math teacher, and it reminds me of how growing up, and all of my math teachers would say, as my sister Kathleen does, I'm sure, show your work. It's not enough to just plug in the answer to this equation, because I don't know how you got to that equation. Maybe it's a lucky guess. Maybe you've got sort of an oddball way of getting there, but you haven't grasped the fundamentals of algebra or whatever the case may be. Showing your work indicates to the teacher, to yourself, to others, that you not only have the right answer, but you know how to arrive at the right answer, which is actually more important than getting the answer right. The process is what we're trying to educate people on. Well, strategic plan writing, by committing our thoughts to paper, shows our work. It draws a line between goals and objectives and strategies and tactics in such a way that you can see the progression of thought. And that's a really powerful distinction, in my opinion, between where some people are and where some people need to be with strategic plan writing. It's not just throwing stuff on a page and calling it good. It's not a random list. It is an exercise in logic, and it is thinking out loud on paper, so to speak. Now, in my world, in the PR agency world, a lot of communications agencies, we tend to call senior executives who work directly with clients and give them advice. We call them counselors. And there's a lot of discussion in my part of the profession, in our world, around what makes for a good counselor and what it means to be a strategic counselor and having the counselor's frame of mind. So in that context, for strategic plan writing, I think the first thing that we have to address is the sort of state of mind. I think this is true regardless of any discipline. If you look at a great athlete, a great musician, a great actor, a great writer, before they swing a bat, before they play an instrument, etc., there's a mindset that goes into how they're going to approach that moment. And every discipline has its version of that. And plan writing is no different. Adopting a counselor's frame of mind, for me, means tapping into what great counselors do, and instinctively or by training. And some of these are fairly simple. They know where they're starting and they know where they're going. I like to use the analogy of like opening the Uber app. You drop a pin on where you are and you drop a pin on where you're going. That's the only way the driver can take you someplace. If we don't know where we're starting, we don't know where we're going, then the trip is meaningless. Great counselors know those two things. We need to know those things. All of us who are writing plans need to say, here's the beginning point and here's the ending point. Now, the other thing that it really distinguishes great counselors from those who tend to be early in their careers, at least in my world, is that they distinguish should from could. One of the things I coach young team members on is when I hear them say things like, well, we think it'd be cool if, or, we could do this. It's like, I don't care if it's cool and I don't care if it's a possibility. What I care about is, will it help solve the problem? Will it help seize the opportunity? So shoulds versus coulds is a critical component of the counselor's frame of mind. And great counselors understand the nature of what I abbreviate as GOAS: goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics. They understand how each one functions, how they differ, and how they interrelate. And perhaps most important, they have a point of view. It is a critical part of plan writing that I think is maybe the most overlooked part, underutilized part of plan writing, is the notion that the ideas in the plan stem from a point of view. And this really comes from a mentor of mine in my early days in Kansas City, who said, we can't just walk in and tell a client, you should do this. They're going to say, why? So we have to say, look, here's our take on things, and therefore you should do this. So let's talk about point of view for just a second. It's based on insight. It's not simply an opinion. It's sort of, if you think about proclamations, like when the mayor declares a certain day or whatever, proclamations are written in this very specific language of whereas this, therefore this. And that's sort of the function of a point of view. We see this, we've observed this, we believe this is going on, and therefore we believe you as the client, you as the individual, this organization must do or should do the following. It's a statement of what's important and why, in the surrounding context of the problem or opportunity that you're working with. And it provides that context for everything else that happens in the plan. And the piece that had been missing for me early in my career is how we bridge these two things you see on the screen. And that is the unique role of point of view. I was always sort of amazed as a young up and comer that we'd have these discussions, and you guys have probably been through this in business planning of your own. You might do a SWOT analysis, for example, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and say, well, okay, then clearly we need to do X, Y, Z. And I would look at these moments and go like, wait, how did you get from that side of the river to this side of the river? Where was the bridge? You've stated this assessment, and then you've just stated this set of recommendations, but I don't get the connectivity between the two. And that's what the point of view can do. It can be that bridge from one side of the river to the other, from the situation description to the council section. And I tend to think of plans as broadly being in two parts, the upfront and the back end. And the upfront is usually analytical or descriptive in terms of laying out the situation and what we're trying to accomplish, et cetera. But then the back end is where the ideas get conveyed and the new stuff is. But to get between the front end and the back end, you need a fulcrum. You need a moment in time that says, so given all this stuff, we think X, Y, Z. I believe we need a plan that does this. I believe as a new national society, we're going to have to do these kinds of things before we can do these kinds of things. Therefore, our strategic plan as an association should emphasize the following for the first 3 years, whatever. But it's that moment that connects the two. That's the role of point of view, and great counselors do that. Now, I'm going to give you one example from my world, again, sort of weaving in and out of different worlds here, because when I've debuted this idea in the past, I used to talk about this and people go like, that's great, but I don't understand what it might look like. What is a sample of a point of view? And I'm going to tell you a quick story about one project that I was a part of several years ago for a food and beverage client. And they were a tequila brand, and they came to us and said, Cinco de Mayo is going to fall on Monday this year, and we want people to celebrate the preceding weekend because we sell a lot of tequila during Cinco de Mayo. So we need you to help us sort of push people in the right time frame. And we looked at this, and I'll spare you all the other details, but the main point is that the assignment was filled with a lot of givens and constraints that we didn't think were going to allow us to succeed in developing a PR plan or a promotion plan for them. And we took a hard look at what our point of view on this was. And this is what we took back to the client. We said, okay, we know you want to accomplish this. Here's the situation you gave us. Our point of view is that you need a permanent solution, not a short-term promotion. This need is going to repeat itself every year, except for those years when Cinco de Mayo cycles back to a Friday or Saturday. And the brand is going to be forced to deal with it from scratch each time. Imagine when Cinco de Mayo falls on a Wednesday, whatever. The majority of time, you're going to have this problem, 5 out of 7 years. So better to actually change Cinco de Mayo from a fixed date occasion to a relative date occasion. Let's take a long-term view. Let's actually reposition this moment in time. And we had some thoughts on how to do that. But that was the point of view. Now, you may look at this and go like, well, they're not going to buy that. And you're right, they didn't. And that's okay. And here's why. This was one assignment in the context of a larger set of assignments with this particular client. Our assessment was we can't succeed with their givens. We're going to fail in this assignment. So our choices are take the assignment as is and very likely fail, or challenge the premise with our point of view. And if they say yes, we're golden. We move ahead and we can demonstrate success, we believe. And if they say no, then we're not out anything. We were almost certainly going to fail under their constraints anyway, so better to walk away. And they did some work with some other folks and it didn't go particularly well, and that's kind of what we expected. But for our purposes today, the point is 2 or 3 sentences. That's a point of view. It could be one sentence. It might be a few paragraphs. It just depends on the situation. But as you can see, this is that moment in time when you're saying, here's our assessment of the nature of the problem or the opportunity and what the implications are for writing a plan. It's not the plan itself yet, but it sets the plan up. Okay, so that's a little bit of context around the mindset and some key characteristics going into plan writing and the importance of point of view in particular. But the real heart of anatomy of a plan is what I call mastering ghosts, the goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics. And in this section, I want to take a formulaic approach. I want to talk about a definition for each of these 4 kinds of statements, some characteristics for each, tips for knowing one when you see one, and writing one when you need one. Before we get into it, I'm going to do a little shout out exercise with you, and literally you can come off mic if you have that ability, or Carl, if you can watch the Q&A and give me some feedback here. But just as a sort of a level set, Keep in mind, we're talking about 4 different kinds of statements. Something could be a goal, it could be an objective, it could be a strategy, it could be a tactic. I've got 3 statements on the screen, and I haven't indicated what kind of statement each one of them is, but that's what I'd like you to give me a shout out on. Do you think I want to be famous is a goal, objective, strategy, or tactic? Is I'll focus on my innate rhythm and physical coordination a goal, objective, a strategy, or a tactic? What kind of statement is I'll start taking ballet lessons now? So I'm going to give you a second to sort of absorb that, read those 3 statements. The task is tell me which kind of statement it is. Let's start with I want to be famous. What kind of statement do you think that is?
You can put that in the Q&A. So Jason says a goal.
Okay.
Goal, Steve.
And we don't have to do a complete round robin, but I'm looking to just take a pulse. What do you think I'll focus on my innate rhythm and physical coordination is? What kind of statement?
By the way, Richard had voted tactic. So
all right. Very good. So you guys can kind of just...
I'll focus on my innate rhythm and physical coordination.
Yep.
Tactic.
Okay. All right. And I know there's a little lag here. This is always better in person, so thanks for hanging in there with me. Let's move to the third. I'll start taking ballet lessons now. What sort of statement do you think that might be?
Objective.
Okay, so this is already a great basis for conversation.
And goal. Go ahead.
Thank you, Carl. That's exactly the help I need. I appreciate it. And thank you all for jumping in the Q&A and doing that. The point is, at this point in the presentation, is not to say you should know this already necessarily, but it's useful, I think, to inform people's baseline orientation towards these kinds of statements. Now, here's what I would call them, and I'll tell you as we go through these why, as we start to develop the definition of each. But I want to be famous is a goal. I'll focus my innate rhythm and physical coordination is a strategy, and I'll start taking ballet lessons now as a tactic. We're going to talk about why I call them that. And look, this is the whole nature of or reason for this presentation. People always duke this out in the boardrooms, but I'm going to give you ways of being definitive in your conviction about what each is and why it is. But let's do another one real quick. We want to dislodge an occupying army. We'll force them to fight a 2-front war. We'll fly round-the-clock bombing runs. So again, what kind of statement is each of these? We want to dislodge an occupying army. Goal, objective, strategy, or tactic.
I have an objective and goal.
Okay. We'll force them to fight a 2-front war.
Steve says strategy.
All righty.
Strategy.
We'll fly round-the-clock bombing runs.
Tactic.
Okay.
Tactic,
So
tactic.
my point in this sort of second round here is, again, less about, keeping score on whether I agree or disagree with your answers, but more to help you sort of become aware of that mental lag that sometimes happens. And usually when I'm doing this live and I've got physical shout outs, I start to hear a difference in people's voices. There's moments early on where I get goal, strategy. And by this time I start getting strategy, tactic. We start to doubt ourselves or question ourselves a little bit. So here's how I would label these. We want to dislodge an occupying army as an objective. We'll force them to fight a 2-front war, strategy. We'll fly around the clock bombing runs, tactic. And hopefully what you're taking away from this is we are bringing to light right away that there is some possible confusion, and even if you may have the conviction of why something is what it is or what something is, you may not be able to articulate why you think that is what it is. That's what usually happens in these sessions. So that's just a way of sort of bringing to mind the landscape of these concepts as we dig into the what and why of each. Now, look, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, these distinctions have served me very well. They've stood the test of time. They're informed by lots of different sources and experience, but I do recognize that people may debate them, and that's fine. And that's a part of the testing ground here. But so I'm just going to talk about these as the truth that I accept, truth in quotes. All right, what is a goal? A goal is an ideal future state or a long-term aspiration. This is the most directional and in some ways vague of all the four statements. It's typically related to things that you might already have in an organization or from your client in the way of mission, vision, or purpose. They're large. They're painting a picture of a future state. They're not objectives yet, and we'll talk about why. Signpost words that cue you that you're in the presence of a goal. There's not a ton, honestly, but they tend to be fairly similar. They tend to be words like we want to be, we will become, we aspire to, our hope is, within 5 years, we should be recognized as, or something like that. Those are big and broad, ideal future states, long-term aspirations. Now, what's missing from a goal that we now see in objective is this measurability and time-specific thing. So back here, where we're talking about directional, long-term, ideal future state, it's a little indefinite. I realize I just said a second ago, like in 5 years, that was a slip of me moving ahead into objectives. Goals aren't necessarily time-bound. So when we talk about objectives, we are talking about a specific intended outcome. Now things are measurable and time specific. We're saying in 5 years, we want to be the leader in this service. An objective answers the question, why are we here? What is it we're trying to actually accomplish? It indicates an intended change in status. Something has to be different as the result of your actions, as a result of your plan. And that which is intended to be different is your objective. So it's not the thing that you do. It's not this overarching aspiration that guides you in what you do. It's the specific result that you're looking for. A mentor of mine back in my Kansas City days used to say, gang, if we get lucky and we get a great piece of coverage for a client, we can draw circles around wherever our arrows land, but that's not the same thing as an objective. We should be shooting our arrows at targets. And I just love that analogy. And it's just so true. Your objective is the target that you are shooting your arrows at. Anything that happens outside of those targets, you can't run around and draw circles around your arrows. I mean, you can, but that's not what a strategic plan is all about. Some of the signpost words that help you identify when you're in the neighborhood of an objective or when you're trying to write an objective are things that indicate that change in status. We're trying to change opinions. We're trying to improve the likelihood of passing this legislation. We're trying to increase awareness. We're trying to decrease opposition. We're trying to minimize our financial exposure. We're trying to raise interest in the following. Each of those kinds of words is about a status and moving the needle in some way. And so those are the words that go with an objective statement. And the easiest thing you can do if you're sort of trying to write something fresh, articulate, or just thinking about what is my objective for this problem, for this opportunity, is to write a little fill in the blank exercise. We'll know we've been successful when the bill passes. We'll know we've been successful when we get 100 new members signed up for the association. We know we'll be successful when we can move into larger office space at the end of the year. Those sorts of things. Specific, time-bound change in status. Now, what's unique about objectives compared to the other three kinds of statements is that they come in two flavors. There's the business objective, which is typically about success that is tied to multiple factors. And then there's another kind I'll talk about in a second. So the business objective, in my world, if I'm working with a client, They may come to me and say, hey, we want to introduce this new product by September, and our objective is to gain 5% market share within the first year. That's great. Terrific. And if I say, okay, cool, we're going to write you a PR plan to deliver that, then I'm almost immediately screwed, because I've just signed up for something that has multiple factors beyond my control. Why is that? Well, in my world, we don't control product quality. We don't control price. We don't control distribution. We don't control sales training. We don't control the technology that goes into the product. We don't control distribution and supply chain, all these kinds of things. All of those things are relevant to the business achieving the overall objective that it has. But can I influence all those things? Not necessarily. Now, similarly, in your world, or in the world of some of your members, as they're doing IT consulting, they may have a client or a need, or they may inadvertently sign up for something where the objective is articulated as achieve zero incidents of compromised client security. Now, here's where I'm going to get over the tips of my skis here, but I know just enough to be dangerous, but I know that you probably can't control all the factors that go into that. You can do best practices related to automated things and firewalls and malware detection and these sorts of things. But I'm not so sure, other than maybe consulting and training and building awareness, that you can control social engineering and spear phishing and these kinds of things that are more the con man's game than the technologist's game. So even in your world, there's probably objectives where you're like, that sounds tempting, but I'm not sure we can control all of that. So for both of us, we have to now look at the discipline objective. In my world, the communications objective. In your world, the specific IT objective. It deals with that portion of the problem that can be addressed through your discipline. And this should, of course, link to the business objective, but it should take your piece of the pie and focus on it. So for me, it might be, well, I can't promise you that specific objective we had a second ago, but I can say that my piece of it is I can increase exposures to and opportunities to buy product X by, say, 25% within the first 12 months. That's what communications can do, because that's not sales driven, that's not distribution driven, et cetera. You might similarly say, well, we can sign up to say we can achieve zero automated attacks on client security, because that's our domain, no pun intended. So the point here is you have to be very careful to identify your sphere of influence as you articulate or sign up for an objective, because again, it's a specific intended outcome. So you have to address an outcome that you have influence over. Now, let's talk about strategy. A strategy is a specific informed choice. This answers the questions, what approach should we use? Given what's in front of us, the point of view we have, what paths forward are available to us, and which one do we think is best? Strategies provide focus, they provide direction, they provide guidance, and most frustrating to people is they necessarily limit courses of action. Strategies are designed to say this way, not that way. And that could be hard for people to accept sometimes, because we all want to keep our options open. It feels better sometimes to say, well, I've got this 14-prong approach here. We're not going to eliminate any possibility. We're going to do all these strategies. All strategies are impossible at the same time, because most are exclude others. They drain resources. They limit your focus, or they limit your ability to focus. And what you're really looking for here is a narrowing when you're writing a plan. What's the best thing to do? Which path is most promising? Now, strategies transcend any one action. They don't tell you exactly what to do. They say, we're going to go this way. Now, we may take, a boat part of the way on this journey, and then we're going to walk, and I'm going to go part of it alone, and then I'm going to meet up with a group, and we're going to hike the rest of the way. It doesn't tell you all of those pieces yet. It just says, here's the path here that we're going to take. Now, because of that, it's critically important before you start brainstorming the tactics, the things that you do, to identify your strategy first. Otherwise, you're going to be developing tactics literally without purpose. Now, there's some characteristics here that I think are important about strategies. They anticipate future actions and reactions. This is sort of the chess metaphor statement. Thinking 2 moves ahead, 3 moves ahead. Oh, if I move my pawn here, my opponent's going to do this there. That's an important part of arriving at strategy, is what are the natural implications of that choice? What dominoes are likely to fall if we take this path? And that goes into assessing whether or not it's the right path to take. Now, strategies also resolve what I refer to as sort of a tension arising from objectives. So, once you've articulated an objective, you're basically creating a distance between current state and future state. Okay, well, we want 25% sales increases within year 1 or whatever the case is. All right, well, now there's this tension because I'm not there yet. I'm here, I want to be here. And this distance between the two needs to be resolved in some way. We need to understand how we're going to do that, what choices we're going to make. In doing that, we need to think about how we connect resources to our objectives. That's part of the role of strategy. This is a true story. It's going to sound ridiculous because it was, but many years ago, we were working with a client, and the chief executive was a very quirky, eccentric, sort of oddball character. And we were in a conference room describing our understanding of a particular assignment and some recommendations we had. And this guy says, well, wait a second. I think we ought to really be, we need somebody big to promote our product on our behalf. What would it take to get Ivana Trump, swear to God, I don't know why, Ivana Trump to talk about our product every day for a year? And our response is that no one in the world has enough money to do that. I mean, a celebrity influencer kind of thing is usually probably minimum $1 million. And you might get 2 service days for that. I mean, do you really want to spend $500 million or whatever it might actually take for somebody to shill your product, every day for a year? It was just bizarre and outlandish and huge. And in his mind, this was a great strategy. It's not a great strategy if you can't connect your resources to your objectives, unless you have $300, $400, $500 million. It doesn't matter if it would actually serve the objective or not, because you don't have the resources to make it happen. So strategies recognize constraints, take them into account. In this idea of determining the brainstorming of tactics as a result of it is related to this idea of resources. If you were to say our strategy is we're going to take a grassroots approach to this and build genuine client enthusiasm among real users, if somebody's brainstorming a tactic that is, again, about celebrity endorsements, it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Our strategy is grassroots. So it's out of sync with the resources or the strategy. So strategies are a specific informed choice, but they do these things. They anticipate future actions and reactions. They resolve the tension between your current state and your future state, and they connect resources to objectives. Now, a strategy is intangible. This is another key characteristic. You can't touch choices. We use phrases like this in my world a lot. Position the client as a thought leader, leverage third parties. We'll take a responsive posture only on this issue. You can't touch any of those. They're concepts, they're ideas, they're notions, but they're not physically a thing. And strategies are not physically a thing. You can't see a strategy in the abstract. The signpost words, therefore, are things like, we're going to leverage this asset. We're going to employ our R&D facility. We're going to showcase our new research. We're going to highlight our track record of success. We're going to focus on this one unique service we provide. We're going to recast this from a problem to an opportunity. All those kinds of things are indicative of a choice that you're going to make, a focus you're going to bring to your work. But none of these things are tangible in and of themselves. Simple fill in the blank here. Our approach to the problem, our approach to the opportunity will be to. And this is designed to sort of prod you in a certain direction. It doesn't say the action we'll take will be, because we're not there yet. A strategy is simply an approach. Now, tactics. This is when we get to the stuff that most people associate with the doing of a plan, because tactics answer the question, what can we do? Tactics are specific actions. I use the little memory rhyme. Strategies are choices we make. Tactics are actions we take. Now we're in the tangible territory. You can touch a white paper on state-of-the-art security issues, but not the decision to create a lead generation piece. So that's the interrelation of the two. The choice is notional. The action is tangible. Now, if I were to do a little exercise with you, if I were to call Carl into my office tomorrow and say, Carl, I want you to go increase awareness on this issue. He might look at me and say, okay, I know what you want sort of at the back end of this thing, but what do you want me to do? That is, as an instruction for me, is not actionable. Yeah, you're right, Carl. What I want you to do is go leverage third parties. Okay, those words make sense to me, Armato, but I don't know what you want me to do. I understand the sort of idea, but what are you asking me to do? Go book an interview with the founder of this association, et cetera. Okay, now that's actionable. That's got it. I know what you want me to do. I'm going to go do this thing. And that's what tactics are. That's the moment in which we understand the act. Signpost words for tactics: develop this, create a symposium, pitch a story, contact an influencer, book a conference, broadcast your latest webinar, convene a symposium, host a webinar. All these kinds of things are the words of actions. So let's kind of revisit the hypotheticals that we were talking about before with these things in mind. And I'll just do this quick verbal recap. The goal: ideal future state, long-term aspiration. Objective: specific intended outcome. Strategy: a choice, provides direction and focus. Tactic: specific action we take. With those definitions in mind, what kind of statement is leverage brands' existing celebrity fans, create advertorials featuring celebrity endorsements, increase brand awareness by 10%? So let's do the same sort of shout out. If you're talking about, well, we're going to leverage this brand or the societies or this organization's existing celebrity fans, what sort of statement might that be? I've given you more to be contemplative about now, haven't I?
Yeah, I'm not seeing it. Oh, here we go. Objective, Heather says.
Okay. Create advertorials featuring celebrity endorsements. Think about signpost words. Think about the fill in the blanks. Think about the definitional characteristics.
Tactic, Richard says.
Okay. All right.
Strategy, tactic.
All right. All right, great. Increase brand awareness by 10%. Any thoughts?
Strategy, goal, but should be time bound.
Okay. So I've thrown a lot at here. I'm going to show you how I would define each of these. Leverage brands' existing celebrity fans is a strategy. It's a choice. It doesn't tell you exactly what to do yet. It provides some direction and focus and helps you identify what kind of actions you may need to take. Create advertorials featuring celebrity endorsements. Create is a really good cue here. That's a doing word. That's an action. If you were to ask yourself, do I know what needs to be done when I read this? It's like, yes, okay, we're going to create a thing. That's a tactic. Increase brand awareness by 10%. Again, start thinking about how you can hone in on those signpost words. Increase, all right, that's a status change word. If we're in the presence of status change, we're probably in the presence of an objective. And I'll tell you another characteristic that I'm going to start adding to my official definitions that I only recently came to identify, which is if you see a number in a statement, it's almost certainly an objective. because that's how we quantify change, is we measure it with numbers, percentage growth, sales increases, numbers of members, volume of products sold, all these kinds of things. So if you see a number, you're probably dealing with an objective. I'm going to tell you a quick personal story to sort of give you a sense of how sweeping I think the scope of these principles really are. Last November, I ran my first 5K. And this was on the heels of about 18 months or so ago. A buddy of mine and I met up for a trip to Sicily. And my buddy Jim, who I've known since college, is a lifelong cross-country runner. And every day on our trip, he would go out for a run before we got going on going and seeing the sights. I, on the other hand, am a sedentary, stocky, genetically unathletic Italian guy who hasn't run since he was forced to in junior high. And Jim was saying, you really ought to take it up. You might enjoy it, because I was talking about how I like to go for a walk every day. And he said, you can get into this easily. Just do a little bit of walking and a little bit of running. Before you know it, you might be able to do something. Well, I had this identity. It's like, I don't run. I'm not a person who runs. Other people run. I don't run. When I got back to Sacramento, I started thinking about that. And it started making me realize how much my mindset was affecting my life, as all of ours do. And I have what I call monkeys in my head, those voices we all have that say, yeah, that's for other people, or I'm this kind of person, not that kind of person. And I started formulating a plan, and I put it on paper. And it's just, if you've got my image up there, it's just a few things. This, not even full page, is a complete strategic plan. Here's what I put down. What's my goal? My long-term aspiration, ideal future state. I want to prove the voices in my head wrong. I want to re-identify myself, what I'm capable of. My objective, run 1 mile without stopping before the end of the year. Time specific, measurable. What's my point of view on this? Because these two things are like my givens. What does this mean to me? Well, I'm going to need help with this, but I don't want to overcommit publicly in case I fail. I wasn't going to make a big deal out of it on social media. I needed a way to sort of ease into this. So my strategies, choices I was going to make Jim, this friend I mentioned, my accountability buddy, because I need some help, but I don't want to make it a big public thing. I need to learn how to run. That's a strategy. I'm going to learn how, and I'm going to take a baby steps approach. I'm not going to go off the deep end right away. The tactics, what are the things I'm going to do? The actions I'm going to take? Well, I'm going to do a walk, run, interval training session 3 times a week. Fancy way of just saying I'm going to go for a walk and run as far as I can until I'm out of breath, and then go back to walking again. And I'm going to do that at least 3 times a week and see if I can increase my ability to run. I'm going to create an ongoing message thread with my buddy Jim, my accountability buddy, and update him every few days so that I've got some accountability and get some encouragement. And because I don't know what I'm doing, I'm going to read at least one credible book on beginning running. That is a complete strategic plan. Now, a business strategic plan may fill a binder. There's all kinds of other stuff that you may factor in, landscape analysis and target audience insights, all these sorts of things. But my point is, at the end of the day, these are the essential building blocks. And I started doing that in July of last year, and I ran a 5K in November. And I did prove the voices in my head wrong. So goal achieved, objective achieved, strategies worked, tactics paid off. But that's just to give you some sense of sort of the transferability and the universality of these ideas across different kinds of situations that you might be trying to address. And I'm into the wrap up here. I want to cover a couple of last things, and I realize I'm pushing my time just a little bit. Hopefully we can still answer some questions, but I want to just quickly note that different parts of the planning process can require different skill sets. The what I refer to as the upfront part of a plan, the goals and objectives, these are inputs, these are givens, these are the things that outline what we're trying to do. The back end are the things that we generate in response to those givens. The inputs tend to be an analytical set of skills brought to bear, trying to understand what's actually going on and what it means. The outputs are generative and creative and deal with possibilities. As we sort of explore those inputs on the upfront here, we may be using research and analysis skills, the examination of data, and then we're interpreting that data to develop a point of view. That's also sort of a part of that analytical skill set. And then there may be this whole other creative piece. In my world, we frequently develop a creative platform or an expression of an idea to create a campaign that's a part of the delivering of the output. So you have these different things going on at different times. That's useful to understand in terms of bringing teams together to contribute. The people who best at analyzing what is going on and what may be needed and what the opportunity is may not be the people best suited to generating the strategies and tactics. It's just something to think about. Some tips for developing greater precision in your plan writing. Simplicity of language encourages precision of thought. Use direct language, get to the point, aim to be understood, not to impress. One of the biggest problems I see when clients or colleagues bring me plans to consult on is that it's almost like they're trying to write a textbook or they're trying to impress people with their sort of counselor language. This is not literature. Plans are thought maps. One statement, one thought. You're trying to be understood. You're not trying to impress. Here's a little tip that sounds bizarre, but is powerful, which is beware of prepositions. If you find yourself writing a statement that has a preposition in it, it nearly always indicates that you're shifting from one kind of statement to another. Send monthly updates to reporters to promote leadership sounds on the surface like a perfectly fine strategic planning statement, except it's both a tactic and a strategy. Send monthly updates to reporters. That's an action. That's a thing we do. Promote thought leadership. That's a strategy. That's a choice we're making, a path we're trying to take. And it may not seem important, on the surface, but anything in your plan that conflates things or doesn't make precision of language its priority can lead to confusion. Plans and parts of plans and plans themselves nest like Russian dolls. You should be able to have this line of sight that says, why this tactic? Because this strategy. Why are we adopting that strategy? Well, because in our point of view, remember, we had this insight. Well, how did we arrive at that? Well, because your objective is the following. And so our take on that is this. Well, how did we arrive at that objective? Well, because long term, you're trying to achieve this bigger aspiration. There should be a connectivity, a line of sight between those. And the same thing is true between plans within the same organization. In the corporate world, they're known as roll-ups. You guys may have run across this in your own work. A product plan is driven by a brand plan, is driven by a division plan, is driven by the company plan. And the same line of sight needs to occur. You should be able to draw a straight line. So if you're doing a strategic plan for the society, you should be able to, let's say you have sub plans for membership development and for, mock legislation or these sorts of things. All of these things should be driven by a higher order plan. You should be able to see line of sight from one to the next. Be flexible in adopting these ideas. I say ghost. When I was working on a lot of Procter & Gamble brands, their internal culture is rooted in OGSM planning, objective goal strategies and measures. It's just a different model. And they use some of the same words, but they define them differently. And this is the big insight here. Don't get caught in a knife fight with somebody over that is a strategy or that isn't, or that is a goal or it isn't. Think in terms of the definitions rather than the labels. You're looking to articulate an ongoing aspiration, an intended outcome, a choice, and an action. As long as you do that, you can call them Fred and Ethel and Lucy for all that it actually matters. It's the notion that's more important than the label. The only non-negotiable is clarity, and that takes hard work. Isaac Newton was supposedly asked how he developed the theory of gravity. He said, I thought about it all the time. Strategic planning is some of the toughest intellectual elbow grease work that we do, and it can take time. But I hope these principles make it easier for you. I know we're at the hour, but I don't have a hard stop, and I'm more than happy to have conversation about any questions or thoughts that you have.
Super good. So some people will have to bounce at the top of the hour just because of other stuff.
Sure.
Let me go back to some questions. So Jason had the question, which probably was answered at this point, but since he's still on the call, I'll ask it. Goals and objectives appear to overlap, don't they?
They're certainly related. They're both a kind of desire. And I think that the way I think about it and would encourage you to think about it is one desire is sort of permanent and one desire is intermittent. And the desire, the goals articulate are what I kind of think of as North Star goals. You know, do you ever reach the North Star? No, but you navigate by it. So if your aspiration is to be, the definitive resource for X, Y, Z in your industry, are you ever really there? There might be moments where you rank higher, you get more calls than so-and-so, whatever, but you can't ever really say that job is done. Goals are never really finished. They inform how you live your life, how you conduct your business, how you go about your work. In order to have the kind of life work experience that you want to have. Now, objectives, it's like, what do I want to get done by Thursday? Where do I want to be in my business by next year? So those are desires. They're like, no, I want to sell 1,000 books by December. That's an objective. So they're both desires. You're absolutely right. And this is why I love these things. You're giving me fresh ways of thinking about this for myself and now for others in the future. But they are both desires, but they're very different kinds. I would think of them in terms of permanent versus transient.
All right. Steve says, where's a good place to find templates to fill out for NSITSP member businesses?
Yeah, in the future, my book. in the future, my book. Yeah, which I'm about. I keep changing my estimate. I'm about 70% of the way through it, and it's funny you should ask about that because only recently, and I think Carl, you and I talked about this at breakfast one day. I'm like, hey, you know what? I think I can create some templates that'll help people with this. So that is going to be a part of the book. I actually don't know of other resources. One of the things I found as I started looking into this for myself, just trying to educate myself 20 years ago, I couldn't really find good literature on it. There's some academic stuff. There's like Harvard Business Review kinds of stuff. But in terms of just like super practical and templatized kinds of stuff, I didn't find any. So I'm trying to create that.
Well, and I'm a big fan of that. So
yeah,
I completely look forward to sharing it with everybody. So Steve also says, great plan on running. Did you use any technology to help you achieve your running goals?
Technology deceived me and caused me great anxiety and embarrassment. I was using, when I was training, such as it was, I was just using my Apple Watch step counter. And I had determined, my watch apps, I had determined that I thought I was doing an 11-minute mile by the time, after several months, something like that. Anyway, I had completely miscalculated the distance I was running. I signed up for the 5K and I said, I can be in this group. I've got this kind of time. And I was halfway through the 5K. I see a sign that says, you're halfway there. And I'm like, oh no, I should be done by now. So I huffed and puffed for 58 minutes, thinking I was going to be done in about half that time. So ignorant, so misguided, but I'd miscalculated and used remedial tech. And after that, I went to an actual little running app. And yeah, sure enough, my distance each day was not what I thought it was. So now I have an emerging sort of hip problem that's keeping me from doing this at the moment. But if I run again, yeah, I'll use better tech.
Very good. Jason says, very interesting. I certainly learned lots of new things today. So,
thank you, Jason. I appreciate you saying that.
Very good. Well, and I've seen this presentation a few times, and I have to say it does morph a little each time, and it gets better. So, very good. Well, thank you for your time today. And if anybody else has any questions, we still have some people online. please put them in. We'd be very happy to have them. Our goal is to get this recording up with the transcript members only in the member resources area. So that should be today.
And I will also, Carl, I'll send you, I've got this 11 by 17 sort of mini poster, I call it. I don't share the direct hard copy with people or soft copy, but I do share this handout that is 98% of the concepts in a quick and easy visual reference. So that'll be available to you as a PDF, and I'll get that to you today, Carl, as well.
Excellent. We will post that along with the presentation. Very good.
And I invite people to contact me by email. I love to continue this conversation. This whole thing of they're both desires, that's going in the book, and you guys are responsible for that today. So I appreciate it.
Very nice. Excellent. Lots of thank yous from Jason and Steve and so forth. So very good. All right. Well, thank you for doing this. And everybody who is a member, please check it out in a member resources. And with luck, we will have you back someday.
Be my pleasure. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.